Today we're heading back to the skies and exploring the aerial combat side of G.I. Joe, looking at Slipstream and its conquest. So strap on your gear, buddy check those parachutes because we're taking to the skies. Lieutenant Gregory Boyajian was born in Provo, Utah, as did his Action Force counterpart. In fact, we're going to infuse this story with details from across the pond to provide some more color to Slipstream's story. Growing up, Greg played console and computer video games, rapidly realizing he excelled at these and started to turn toward hacking. He was a whiz, especially with Space Invaders and the Big Waxer arcade game. But just before he got into any trouble with hacking, Greg discovered his love of flying. So instead of a clan of hackers, while still a teenager, Greg joined the Junior Civil Air Patrol, an ROTC, as a cadet, which earned him an Air Force commission. Greg then went to basic at Joint Base Lackland in San Antonio, Texas, and finished top of his class in flight school. His computer skills and experience with CAP gave him a competitive advantage against the rest of his class. Greg is also a polyglot, speaking multiple languages, including French, Armenian, and Greek, as well as being really good at table tennis, and has a reputation for being a mimic and cracking jokes all the time. So after training, Greg became a commissioned officer in the United States Air Force as an O2 lieutenant with an MOS of 11 F3. In the Devil's Due era of G.I. Joe, he's an O3 captain. As his file cards note, it takes a light touch to fly a fighter jet that's tricked out with highly sensitive, computer-assisted control services, but Slipstream has the eyes, the brain, and the guts to make that aircraft do exactly what he wants. Greg was put in the pilot seat of incredibly advanced tactical fighters, bristling with cutting-edge technology, computer-assisted control services that allow for things that conventional craft find impossible, like flat turns without banking, flight axis shift, and horizontal rolls, and all of that combined with surface mechanisms and vectored thrust. It takes a gentle touch and intense control, as even the slightest tremors or movement can be translated to a drastic movement in the airframe, so it requires someone like Slipstream with the eye, the touch, and the brain to make it do exactly what he wants. Slipstream's first assignment was with the 32nd Tactical Fighter Squadron at Camp New Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where he flew the U.S. Air Force's Air Superiority Fighter, the venerable F-15. Due to his prowess in the air, after that tour, Greg was offered a post with the 57th Tactical Training Wing at Nellis Air Force Base, which was part of the U.S. Air Force Fighter Weapons School. It was there that he flew F-5s, which were configured as aggressors for training and red flag exercises, since it resembled the Soviet MiGs and its flight characteristics. Over time, as an aggressor, Greg trained Air Force, Navy, Royal Air Force, West German, and French fighters. He was later posted to Edwards Air Force Base, where he was flight testing new advanced tactical fighters and flight demonstrators for low observable stealth projects. At one point, he was testing X-30 Conquests, which is what got him assigned to the G.I. Joe team. However, Slipstream has flown multiple G.I. Joe assets over the years, from transport planes all the way up to space shuttles, as missions require. He's most known for his time behind the stick of the X-30 Conquest, but is also known as the pilot to the Cyclone X-26A, Recap Radical Electronically Controlled Attack Plane, Thunderwing Jet, and the X-36 Vector Fighter Jet. G.I. Joe's Conquest X-30 is pushed forward by dual 26,000-pound thrust turbofan engines. The Action Force TAC profile expounds upon that just a bit more. The jet has two GE F404 turbofan engines that give it a top speed of Mach 2.42 and a combat radius of about 1,200 miles. From the slant-back pilot seat under the blast-proof tilt-back canopy, the pilot has control of the stick, the electro-optic sensors, and the laser guidance systems, things like FLIR, LRMTS, and lantern pods linked to the HUD, which is informed by the APG-65 radar borrowed from an FA-18 Hornet, which is placed in the nose. This gives the X-30 ground attack and air-to-air capability, making it truly a multi-role, all-weather, round-the-clock fighter bomber. The pilot can squeeze off rounds from the double-blast 25 Bike twin GAU-12 cannons, or launch the AIM-12 Light Sparrow air-to-air missiles. These are the Joe's version of the Fox 1, the AIM-7 Sparrow, and Fox 3, the beyond Viz range AIM-120 AMRAAM, which is their advanced medium-range air-to-air missile. It can carry 7,000 pounds of ordnance on as many as 11 hardpoints, and it features very cool shark teeth in the nose, made famous by the P-40s of the Flying Tigers. Action Force says that it's believed up to 30 X-30s were built, forming 2 squadrons and an operational conversion unit. When you look at the design of the X-30, you may think, how the hell does that thing fly? Well, it's based on real airplane design. Meet Grumman's experimental X-29, which was flown by both the U.S. Air Force and NASA. Join me for a moment as we head back in time to tell this part of the tale, and then we'll get back to Slipstream. But for right now, we're going to a pre-war time in the 1930s. Professor V.N. Belayev designed and built his BP-2 and BP-3 gliders during that time. This was during a period when the industry began experimenting with more exotic designs and alternatives to production. Wing design was a huge area of interest, from flying wings to playing with the sweep fore and aft of the wings, along with dihedral and anhedral degrees. What this means is, how does the quarter chord line of the wing line up with the fuselage, from the fuselage to the outward tip, and also how do the wings curve on a horizontal axis, meaning are they parallel to the ground, do they angle up, or do they have a negative angle? So anyway, this led to Belayev's 1939 DBLK long-range bomber, a distinct design in its forward-swept wings and its twin fuselage design. And then during the war, the Luftwaffe and airplane designer Hans Volker designed a forward-swept bomber in the Junkers Ju-287, which then led to him going to Moscow to work on the EF-131 variant and OKB-1-140. What came from that in the 60s was a civilian business jet called the Hansa Jet that was also FSW, forward-swept wings. The United States was also playing with various designs around the same time, especially in the early days of jet engine technology. One of the most iconic, prolific planes of World War II, the P-51 Mustang, got some of these very treatments. Test versions got rocket engines to replace the nose prop, ramjet engines. They even built a twin fuselage variant in the F-82 Twin Mustang, meant to be a very long-range escort fighter to protect the Superfortress fleet. They also built a forward-swept wing P-51, which led to the FJ-1 Fury and later the F-86 Sabre. The FSW P-51 only got to the wind tunnel model stage due to the sweep angle twisting the wings asymmetrically, which ended the test as the wings would break off from the body. A lot of those design elements of the F-86 found their way to the F-16 Viper, and that's where our story goes next. It was finally a couple decades after the war when composite materials developed to the point where they could flex and hold under pressure, mitigating some of that warping and wing breakage. So, in 1977, DARPA, along with the U.S. Air Force Flight Dynamics Lab at Wright-Patt, put out a request for new forward-swept design as part of the aptly named Forward-Swept Wing program. General Dynamics was already playing with their F-16 platform, including the F-16XL Cranked Arrow, a design that lost out to the F-15 Eagle for the ETF program, and another of those designs was the F-16 FSW concept. Rockwell submitted a FSW variant of the Sabre, called Sabre Bat. However, these both lost out to Grumman and their X-29, which was submitted based on an F-5 Freedom Fighter or F-20 derivative that they called the Grumman 712, which also included landing gear and control surface actuators borrowed from their competitor, the F-16. This project evolved into their X-29, and with an $87 million contract, Grumman built 2 of these planes. It featured the distinctive forward-swept wings along with forward-mounted canards to share the lift load, and helped with pitch and roll and supported the advanced fly-by-wire FCS or flight control system. With a maiden flight out of Edwards Air Force Base in 1984, the X-29 became the first FSW design to go supersonic while testing high-alpha BFM and ACM, that's high angle of attack, basic fighter maneuvering, and air combat maneuvers, aka dogfighting. This is one of the planes that Slipstream was testing before it was assigned to G.I. Joe and redesignated the X-30 Conquest. Per a piece on the website 3djoes.com, the Joe's Conquest was designed by Guy Cassaday, who'd seen the X-29 in a magazine like Time or Newsweek, and he ran with it. Cost reduction measures included removing the arrestor hook, which would have allowed it to land on the USS flag. Action Force TAC profile does mention that it is carrier rated. The Conquest was Cassaday's first model he built during his time with Hasbro. In 2017, Battle Force 2000 upgraded to a later block version and redesignated the Conquest to the Vector X-36 fighter jet. In 1997, McDonnell Douglas developed a tailless X-plane with NASA called the X-36. Exotic designs that are just now working their way into NGAD concepts, as next-gen air dominance concepts, 6th generation fighters. The plane was built at 28% scale and was a remotely piloted research aircraft meant to demonstrate tailless, high-alpha fighter agility combined with low RCS, that's radar cross-section, in other words stealth. This was around the same time that McDonnell Douglas's Phantom Works, a special projects division like Lockheed's Skunk Works, put out an exotic black plane called the Bird of Prey, and the stealth X-45 UCAV, which led to the Phantom Ray UCAV later on. Boeing's X-36 first flew in 1997, around the same time that Russia's Su-47 Berkut had its first test flight. This is the one that led to the 5th-gen Su-57 Felon. The NGAD program is looking for replacements for the F-22 Raptor, which incidentally came to G.I. Joe's Slipstream and Ace in the Vala vs. Venom era in the form of the Thunderwing jet. And now we go back to Slipstream. Slipstream first appeared in Marvel and Larry Hama's A Real American Hero comic book series with issue 49. Here he was behind the control yoke of a C-130 Hercules heading towards Springfield to rescue Ripcord from Cobra. In issue 54, he got the high score on the Migwaxer arcade game in the Fort Wadsworth PX snack bar, which impressed Wild Bill, Airborne, and Ace. He later flew the Conquest in Sierra Gorda with Snake Eyes in the back seat, disguised as Flint. He said he has so much control that he can fly Mach 1 at just 100 feet off the deck. They then ended up in a dogfight with a Firebat launched from a Terradrome. In issue 65, Slipstream was in space, the USS Defiant, with the Joes in a three-way with an Air Force shuttle and Cobra's Big Red spacecraft. Greg was again with Wild Bill in a transport plane on the tarmac of Frusenland Airport when they were attacked by the Baroness's forces in issue 68. And then at the start of the Cobra Civil War, Slipstream and his Conquest escorted the recon team and captured Cobra Mamba to the shore of Cobra Island under the cover of night and right at wavetop level. In issue 115, Slipstream was Ghost Rider's backseat man in the Phantom X-19 Stealth Fighter, a plane based on Northrop's F-19A Spectre, which was seen in art form by artist Attila Hedja. That 19 designation was skipped in the real world to avoid being close to the odd numbers of Soviet planes, namely the MiG-19. The reason this plane came about in model form was that there was speculation going around that America was building a new plane that would be stealth. However, that ended up being the F-117 Nighthawk after the Hopeless Diamond, B-Sax, Tacit Blue, and Half Blue configuration testing at Groom Lake. Ghost Rider and Slipstream took the stealth right down to the deck to get lost in the ground clutter, hiding from AAA batteries, SAM sights, and a sky filled with Cobra bogies and tangos. And through a gauntlet of fire and snakes, they managed to snap a photo of a Terradrome in Benzene City confirming that Cobra was violating international agreements. For the Bob Graves rescue op down in Sierra Gorda, Slipstream paired up with Lift Ticket and crew chief Stalker to drop Bravo team in country. On the ground, for some reason, Lift Ticket called Slipstream his call sign, while Slipstream called Lift Ticket Windmill. And then in issue 201, Slipstream and Ace walked the newly built secret runway at the pit, which could put an aircraft in the air 15 seconds after an alert came in. He was then part of the formation flyover of the ceremony at the pit to honor Snake Eyes, who had just fallen in battle during a fight with Serpentor. This is issue 214, a subtle nod to Snake Eyes' DD-214 separation. After Laura 343 and her Viper goons made off with Sean Collins' Snake Eyes, Slipstream, Ace, and Dogfight were called up to intercept Cobra's Night Ravens, Rattlers, Mambas, and Aspids, having been diverted from maneuvers over Long Island Sound. Slipstream buzzed and underslung his tank and found Snake Eyes, Sean, atop the tank before being taken out by a Mamba that fired an AA missile at him. He then went with payload up in the shuttle to fix General Colton's orbital directed energy weapon. Issue 279 was an untold tale and found Slipstream launched off the deck of the USS Flag after it had been attacked and the cables and lifts in the deck itself were damaged, and they were to run combat air patrol ring around the flag. The attack had come from planes launched from Terradromes Cobra had installed in the fjords off of the southern coast of Frusenland. Conquest and Sky Striker were radar distractions so Stealth Fighter could fire off a trio of harms at the Terradrome. When a second wave of Cobra fighters launched to attack the flag, Slipstream took his Conquest nose to nose with the Rattlers and Hurricanes. He got good tone, a lock, and fired his remaining AIM-7s, saving the flag and Ghost Rider. At the end, Slipstream told them that Yojo Colas were on him in the wardroom. Slipstream also appeared in quite a few issues of G.I. Joe's Special Missions, the first of them being Larry Hama and Herb Trimpe's issue 3. He was part of a strike team in Sierra Gorda, but this time on the ground, working with Stalker, Crankcase, and Leatherneck to outfit a battle wagon tasked with knocking out SAM sites at an airbase controlled by Colonel Sharif. However, that wasn't their real mission. Ace and his flight were going to take out the airbase with their AGMs and their suite of electronic warfare jamming equipment. Their real mission was to break in and steal a VTOL Yak-38, the Russian equivalent of a Harrier. Slipstream was to fly the Yak out under the cover of Ace's airstrike, but the plane had been stripped, so instead they loaded the jet into the bay of a massive Antonov AN-124 cargo plane and lugged it out that way. A mercenary named Deke kamikazed a MiG into a pair of SAM sites to save Slipstream and the Joe team. In issue 5, he and Ace went up in a Sky Striker and a Conquest to meet a Night Raven that was doing recon. Before taking off, Slipstream gave a toy of Transformer Jetfire to one of his ground crew whose son had just gone in for a tonsillectomy. In the air, the Night Raven snapped off a couple air-to-airs, then popped a flare to blind the Conquest on his 6. The Raven fired another missile, so it was Slipstream's turn to launch a flare, and at that close range, it also fried the Raven's sensors. The maneuver, though, was done at high speed, so Slipstream's engine flamed out and stalled, and so Slipstream went into a nosedive and a deadly spin. Mere feet above the drink, Slipstream kicked his engine back on, and he was able to make a high alpha climb, and he was able to get back on the tail of the Raven and go to guns and squeeze off some 20 Mike depleted uranium rounds, which chewed up the tail of the Night Raven. And then Fox 2, he put a couple sidewinders right up the Raven's tailpipe. In issue 10, Slipstream was in the Four Fans of Freedom, G.I. Joe's C-130 Hercules with Wild Bill and Lift Ticket as they picked up Chuckles and Prince Nagolto in Kaliningrad. In issue 12, he flew in a tight formation with Ace in a Skystriker and Maverick in a Vector when they landed that Saboteur Firefly attack to steal the electronics bay from both the XP-14F and the X-30. In issue 20, Slipstream was again in a C-130, this time in the Arctic over the Bering Strait when they had to drop a Snowcat onto the ice shelf to assist the October Guard whose BTR had come under fire from a pack of Cobra Ice Wolves. In the final issue of Special Missions, issue 28, Slipstream was with Ace and Payload in the USS Defiant space shuttle. For this mission, Slipstream was in the engineer seat. They were tasked with doing a recon run from low Earth orbit to see if they could detect a secret airbase on the coast of Punta del Mocosa, and then, as unrealistic as it sounds, try to land on the deck of the USS Flag. But we still get Conquest in this issue. Wild Weasel is leading a flight of Stratoviper piloted Python conquests against the Joe elements in the area. We see another FSW plane too in the form of Cobra's Condor plane. That plane is similar to SAC's WS-110A that eventually evolved into the XB-70 Valkyrie. It maybe has a bit of the Rockwell D645-1 in its design too. So you take those, combine that with Lockheed's closed wing or ring wing flying bog seat concept, and there you have a Condor. So anyway, back up in space, Slipstream got into a drone and was able to save what's-his-name in the stealth fighter who was being attacked by a Condor, and then at the end wound up in the cockpit again of the Defiant, which defied physics to land on the Flag's flight deck. Slipstream was also in the G.I. Joe and Transformers miniseries, trying to figure out what was going on after a meeting with Superion when Optimus Prime was assassinated and all the Autobots were ordered to return back to the Ark. He, Ace, and Lift Ticket ended up in a dogfight with an entire squadron of Cobra Rattlers. And then he flew his Conquest when the Joes teamed up with both Cobra and the Autobots to battle the Decepticons. In the second volume of G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero, Slipstream appeared in the battle on Cobra Island against Serpentor and his cult called the Coil. He and Ace led the air support unit of fixed-wing craft comprised of 10 green shirt pilots. In America's Elite issue 32, during the World War III story, Slipstream and his Conquest were in an aerial battle over Paris, France with Destro's AGPs and Night Ravens that had suddenly decloaked. In G.I. Joe Yearbook 3, there's a story at the beginning where Cobra Commander had Snake Eyes delivered to the Cobra Consulate building in New York City via Aspid, and so Slipstream with Scarlet as his Wizzo, that's Weapons Systems Officer, doing a recon flyover of the Cobra stronghold. In the 1990 Action Force Annual, Slipstream led an airstrike in Vietnam on the Mekong Delta against a Cobra airbase. G.I. Joe Yearbook 2 introduces the animated version of Slipstream that was to debut in the 86th season of the Sunbow animated series. It says he's going to fly the new Conquest and that he's in an odd position because he's an officer, so he ranks above most other Joes, but he's also fresh out of academy, so he hasn't got the experience that others have. And so, voiced by Dan Gilvezan, Slipstream appeared in quite a few episodes, but he really didn't say a whole lot. His most prominent roles came in Arise Serpentor Arise, and later in the same story, we see him flying a Conquest in Egypt and later battling Night Ravens over Genghis Khan's tomb. Most of his other appearances find him as flight leader, leading the Conquest fleet into battle. However, in Joe's Night Out, he's now piloting a Tomahawk helicopter, which tells us now that he's proficient with both fixed-wing and rotary craft. He also had a major role in the episode In the Presence of Mine Enemies, which finds Slipstream in a dogfight with a female Stratoviper called Raven, when they're both shot down and end up at a secret Cobra laboratory base fighting bats and then later this monster bioweapon. In 1986, Slipstream came boxed with the Conquest, and again in 2003 with presumably a later block version of the same fighter. In 2004, he piloted the Thunderwing jet, and some even came with another G.I. Joe pilot named Ace, specifically those exclusive to Toys R Us. By 2008, he was back to his Conquest. This was a Target exclusive. And so there you have it, the story of G.I. Joe Slipstream and his plane, the Conquest. And so with that's a wrap on this, my friends. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.